You said something 2 hours ago? It was fine. Nobody flinched. Nobody gave you a look. And yet, here you are, replaying it for the fourth time, quietly editing a sentence that's already been said out loud. You keep testing a softer version, a sharper one. You rearrange the words, try to figure out if it landed the way you meant it to. You know no one else is still thinking about it. And still, your brain hits play again, like a song it refuses to skip. If you do this, you've probably been told you overthink. Maybe you've told yourself that. Maybe you've even apologized for it, like your brain came with a feature nobody asked for. But psychology tells a very different story about people who do this. It has nothing to do with anxiety or insecurity. It points to a specific set of traits that most people simply don't have. And once you see what they are, you might stop treating your own brain like it's the problem. Here's the first thing. Most people feel emotions in broad strokes. They feel bad or good or off. But you feel things in a resolution most people don't even know exists. You don't just feel uneasy after a conversation. You feel that very specific kind of uneasy you get when you said something honest and then realized the room wasn't ready for it. That's not embarrassment. It's not regret. It's its own thing. And the fact that you can feel the difference is already unusual. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it emotional granularity. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research found that people with high emotional granularity regulate their emotions more effectively and make better social decisions under pressure. So your brain isn't stuck in a loop because it's glitching. It's replaying because it processes emotional detail at a level most people's brains skip entirely. They get the summary. You get the full transcript. The second trait is something you probably don't even realize you're doing. When someone talks to you, your brain isn't just listening to the words. It's tracking everything around the words. Tone, micro-expressions, hesitations, word choice, the tiny emotional shifts between sentences. You're running multiple layers of analysis in real time without even trying. Psychology has a term for it, but honestly, from the inside, it doesn't feel like anything clinical. It just feels like paying attention, like you can't not notice. And here's the thing, that processing doesn't stop when the conversation ends. Your brain keeps going because it hasn't finished yet. This is why you can tell a coworker disagreed with you even though they smiled and said, "Sure, sounds great." You caught the half-second delay before they answered. Most people register none of that. You registered all of it. Only about 15 to 20% of people operate at this level of social perception. It can feel exhausting, but it also means you understand people at a depth that most never will. The third trait is a quiet, almost invisible sense of responsibility for how your words land on other people. You don't just say something and move on. You track it. You monitor whether your honesty came across as warmth or accidentally felt like judgment. Think about the last time you said something slightly off at dinner. Maybe you interrupted someone. Maybe you were a little too direct. Most people at that table forgot about it before dessert. You were still replaying it while brushing your teeth. Not because you're fragile. Because somewhere in your wiring, there's a quality control department for human interaction that most people don't have installed. It doesn't take breaks, and it definitely doesn't have an off switch. The fourth trait is a strong internal moral compass, not in some grand philosophical way. More like this: you replay conversations because you're checking your own consistency. You're comparing what you said against what you actually believe was fair or true. And when there's even a small gap, it nags at you, and there's research behind this. Turns out, people who naturally notice the moral weight of small, everyday moments tend to be more trustworthy and more likely to act on their principles even when it costs them something. So when you're lying awake replaying that one sentence, you're not being dramatic. You're running an integrity check most people never bother with. Now here's where it gets interesting and maybe a little uncomfortable. The fifth trait is something you've probably noticed but never had a name for. When you replay a conversation, you're not just going over what happened. You're quietly running simulations of what might happen next. You're analyzing patterns, testing possibilities, trying to read where things are heading before they get there. You catch yourself thinking, why did they go quiet right after I said that? That laugh felt different than usual. Something shifted, and I can't tell what. These aren't irrational worries. They're probability assessments based on data most people didn't even notice was there. This is why you sometimes get a gut feeling that something is off with someone, and days later it turns out you were right. Your friends might call it intuition. It's not. It's pattern recognition operating at a level most people's brains don't attempt. You're not overthinking, you're thinking ahead. The sixth trait is one most people don't want to look at directly, but I think it matters. If you replay conversations, and especially if you focus on what might have gone wrong or how you might have been perceived, there's a real chance this pattern didn't start randomly. It started because at some point in your life, reading people accurately wasn't optional. It was necessary. Maybe it started when you were young. Maybe there was a home where emotions shifted without warning, where love felt like something you had to earn and could lose at any moment, where you learned to read a parent's face before you knew whether it was safe to speak. Your brain learned early that replaying interactions could protect you. It learned to ask, did I do something wrong? Are they upset? Am I safe here? Psychologists call that kind of wiring hypervigilance. But when you're living inside it, it doesn't feel clinical. It just feels like being careful. And even now, years later, in relationships that are genuinely kind and stable, your brain is still running that old program, still scanning, still checking. This is important to hear. That's not a flaw in who you are. That's an adaptation that helped you survive something. And now, with awareness, you can start to notice the difference between a replay that carries real information and one that's just your shoulders tensing because someone texted, "Can we talk later?" with a period at the end. Not every silence is rejection. Not every pause means danger. But the fact that your brain learned to check is not something to be ashamed of. It's proof that you found a way through something difficult, and you're still here, which leads to the seventh trait. And honestly, this one might be the reason all the others exist. People who replay conversations tend to have an unusually deep capacity for real connection, not small talk, not networking. I mean, the kind of connection where you remember what someone told you 3 months ago and bring it up again because it genuinely stayed with you. Where a single honest conversation with someone you trust can shift the entire weight of your week. Psychologist Edward Deci found that the people who form the deepest bonds aren't the most confident or charismatic. They're the ones who pay attention, who notice when something shifts, who replay the conversation not because they were insecure, but because the person on the other end of it actually mattered to them. That's what this is. When your brain hits play again at midnight and starts rearranging words, it's not a malfunction. It's the sound of someone who takes human connection seriously enough to keep refining how they show up inside of it. So maybe tonight you'll be lying there again, room quiet, conversation long over, your brain still editing a draft that nobody else will ever read, and maybe that's just what it sounds like when someone actually cares, even at 2 in the morning when nobody's watching.